All of my content is also posted on fivecolorcombo.com, a great website for all of your Magic the Gathering needs, including articles, podcasts, and custom Magic the Gathering tokens and playmats. As a subscriber to my channel, you can use the discount code Nizzahon5 for a 5% discount in their store. You can find the link in the description below. Hello everyone, I'm Nizzahon, and we have some big news to talk about today. Earlier today, or yesterday, depending on your time zone, Aaron Forsythe made a post on Wizards' website announcing that Standard will be returning to the old way it rotated. If you don't know, Mark Rosewater announced a couple of years ago that they were going to start rotating Standard twice a year at the same time that they switched to a two-set block, which earlier blocks had been 3 sets, so they were changing a lot all at once. And so the idea would basically be that Standard would rotate twice a year each time one of these new, smaller blocks comes out. And that's the world we're living with right now. With the release of Kaladesh, Dragons of Tarkir and Magic Origins rotated out of Standard. I realize those aren't exactly a block, but they were functioning as one in terms of rotation because of the awkwardness of Khans of Tarkir being a 3-set block. But rotation isn't going to happen like that anymore. It won't happen like that ever again until they change their mind again. It will only happen once a year from now on. Blocks will still only be 2 sets, though, and rotation will occur when the second large set of the year, commonly called the fall set, comes out. And in this new form of rotation, all the sets from 2 years previous, from the previous year rather, from 2 years ago is what I mean, will rotate out. What this means is that sets will now remain in Standard for 2 full years, and this is immediately relevant because Battle for Zendikar block will now be in Standard for a long period of time. That means Standard will either have 5 sets that are legal just after rotation and 8 sets, 6 right when the first set comes out and so forth, 7 and then 8. There won't be another Standard rotation until the first set of the block after Amonkhet is released a little less than a year from now. Basically, this reverts back to the old rotation pattern of once a year while maintaining the 2 sets a block that became the norm after Khans of Tarkir. In this video, I'm going to go over the pros and cons of this change and give you my take on the issue on the whole. Let's start positive and start with the pros. As I see it, there are 3 of them, and all of them relate to the fact that cards will now be in Standard for a longer period of time, 2 years to be exact. The first of these, and this is what Wizards cited in their announcement today, is that rotation won't serve to be as big of a barrier to newer players, at least not as frequently. Imagine coming to Magic about 2 months ago, maybe you did, and deciding to invest in a Standard deck. After rotation, it was probably left in shambles, and that isn't a good way to get started. A lot of new players who are sort of interested in getting started would hear about rotation in general and say they aren't going to start playing until rotation happens, and that means Magic is losing money in the meantime. Now, this will still happen, but only once a year instead of twice a year, so new players will have an easier time entering into the Standard format, and that's what Standard's supposed to be. It's supposed to be the easier format to get into. The next pro relates to this, whether you are a new player or not. But now, if you invest in a competitive Standard deck, chances are that it can remain competitive for a longer period of time. Now, this is no guarantee, mostly because new sets coming out can dislodge established decks before the new set was in Standard, even without rotation occurring. But with this new rotation, the chances your deck stays relevant for longer are much higher, simply because the cards won't rotate as quickly. Lastly, is that when the last set comes out before rotation, which in this case will be the currently unnamed second set in the Amonkhet block, deck builders will have access to a larger pool of cards, and this increases the chances of diversity existing in Standard, greater diversity existing in Standard, and also has a chance of breeding greater creativity among deck builders and players. Now, all of that sounds great, but not everything about this new, well, old really, but new now, way of rotating Standard is good. So let's go ahead and move to the cons. And actually, I could really only think of one con, but it is a pretty big one, I have to say. In this case, I'm just going to use a card to help me make my point. And that card is Collected Company. Collected Company was an incredibly powerful and oppressive card. By the end of the last Standard format, just before Dragons of Tarkir, the set Collected Company was in, before that rotation occurred, basically all decks, at least many of them, ran 4 copies of the card. Take a look at Worlds from earlier this year to see what I mean. By the end of the format, there was a lot of exhaustion when it came to the card. People were just tired of seeing it. It wasn't any fun to play against. It wasn't even very much fun to play because everyone was doing it. And the consensus was that the card was just too strong in the format. Many people, myself included, commented that if rotation weren't about to happen, the card would have to be hit with the banhammer because it was just so unbalanced. Well, in these new rotation rules, instead of this rotation happening and us being very happy to finally be in a world without Collected Company, right now we would be looking at about 6 more months of Collected Company decks. Basically, the con we are talking about here is that there isn't going to be as frequent of a reset button to remove overpowered cards from Standard, and because of that, Wizards is going to have to do something it hates to do. At times, it is going to have to ban cards from Standard. Letting a card dominate a format for, let's say, a year should be a long enough time to realize a card's overpowered, and cards should be banned at that point in an effort to add some freshness to Standard. And this is sort of the point with this con in general. Standard will not shift and change quite as drastically, quite as frequently anyway, and as such, sets of cards or individual cards could come to dominate a format for far too long. In short, Wizards is going to have to change how they do things and be willing to ban cards that have been too dominant. So where do I stand on this new way of rotating Standard on the whole? And I would say on the whole, I have to say that I do like this change. There really isn't a whole lot to complain about. Money we invest into Standard decks will be better spent because our decks will be legal and playable for longer. New players will be more interested in joining the game, something that, don't be mistaken, is good for all of us. And deck building will improve to a degree, at least at certain stages during Standard formats, as it will have access to an increased set of tools in the larger number of cards we'll have access to. In short, I'm on board with these changes, provided Wizards is willing to admit mistakes and ban a card from time to time when things get out of hand, which I think they would have had to do if they'd decided to let Collected Company be around for 6 months longer. Well, that does it for this edition of Nizzahon's Idle Thoughts. If you found this video useful, don't forget to click the like button. If you have any questions or comments about the new way of rotating Standard, or if you want to share your own opinion on the change, post them in the comments below. And if you want to make sure you get future editions of Nizzahon's Idle Thoughts, as well as other Magic the Gathering content, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.